We've been talking a lot about gambling and the NFL's, at times, clumsy handling of the gambling policy. We've talked a few times about this Jonathan Gannon tampering situation, which has me thinking there's a lot more that they're never going to tell us about that went on. That was the gist of the conversation I was trying to have with Howie Roseman before he launched into the ad hominem attack, calling me one of the top 5 conspiracy theorists, simply because I was trying to ask some basic questions about what they knew, when they knew it, and how this whole Gannon thing came to be. Because I reject the suggestion that the Cardinals had some crisis of conscience and raised their hand and said, you know what, in hindsight, we called Jonathan Gannon before we should have. We are reporting ourselves for doing something that we are acknowledging we did it, and we're ready to take our punishment. Bullcrap. The Eagles, I believe, found out about it. The Eagles, I believe, got a sense of how much it disrupted and distracted Jonathan Gannon in the preparations prior to the Super Bowl, and the Eagles made a stink about it. And the league convinced the Eagles to accept a swap of draft picks to just keep quiet about it. And remember, it was just a year ago that the NFL found the Dolphins had blatantly tampered with Saints coach Sean Payton, Buccaneers quarterback Tom Brady, took away a first-round pick from the Dolphins. They didn't get compensation in New Orleans or Tampa Bay because they weren't in a position where there was anything they could share with the media that would make the league look bad. And it's more than just bad PR. This is what a reader and a listener sent me last night. I wrote about it. The idea that maybe what the NFL was doing here was concealing this information because there's a way that a creative legal theory could be crafted. If you bet on the Eagles to win the game or the Eagles to cover the spread, and through the blatant violation of a clear NFL rule against tampering, coupled with the NFL's chronic failure to effectively enforce the rules against tampering, a distraction was created and can be proven, a tangible distraction based upon the number of hours spent by Jonathan Gannon in the 2 weeks prior to the Super Bowl, not working, but working instead on getting ready for his interview with the Cardinals, lining up his staff, putting together the materials he planned to present, the binder he would distribute. Any minute that he spent preparing for that interview was one less minute available to be spent preparing his defense for the Super Bowl. And I reject this notion that we hear from time to time, well, I have time to do both. Baloney. You're talking about one game. Most important game of your career is coming up. Every waking minute should be spent preparing for that game. And any time you spend doing anything else is less time than you have available to spend on that game. And if you're throwing on top of the usual human demands of sleeping, eating, bathroom, shower, although hygiene sometimes takes a back seat, other important pressing family business, that stuff already carves away the amount of time you have available. For anything else, anything you do, reading a book, right? Going golfing, going to a basketball game, anything you do during that 2 weeks carves into the amount of time that you would otherwise be spending on getting yourself ready for the most important game of your life. So if it can be proven, and look, what would happen is you file a lawsuit, you take discovery, and you find out how much time Jonathan Gannon spent those 2 weeks getting ready for this interview, getting ready to have a staff of coaches, calling guys up saying, hey, do you want to join me in Arizona? How long were those calls? How much time did he spend mapping out who he's going to call? How many different people did he call? All that time spent is less time spent studying film, trying to cure this chronic issue the Eagles defense had with adjusting the motions and shifts. It's something Sims talked about in the run-up to the Super Bowl. Well, if we knew about it, the Chiefs knew it was there, and the Chiefs exploited it with the 2 biggest plays of the game. What happened? Shifts that the Eagles defense couldn't deal with. Uh-oh. Instead of plugging that hole in the defense, Jonathan Gannon was getting ready to plug himself to the Arizona Cardinals. So, look, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know if I was practicing law in a state where gambling is legal, I would at least explore the available theories. I would get creative. When you're dealing with a new industry, and legalized gambling is new, it's 5 years old. That's infancy as it relates to how it's going to mesh with the legal standards that will or won't apply. And I think of it as a continuum. And if we could ever prove, for example, if we could ever prove, and this is the most extreme example, that the NFL is rigging games, that the NFL is engineering. If there would ever be evidence, and I don't think there ever will be, I've said this time and again, I don't think the NFL is rigged, in part because I don't think the NFL is competent enough to successfully rig games in a way that would keep it quiet forever. But let's say someone admits that the Super Bowl was rigged, that the NFL wanted the Chiefs to win. Let's say that would happen. That would seem to be facts that would fall into the category that would allow anyone who bet on the Eagles to file a civil lawsuit against the NFL, because we're placing these wagers assuming that there's integrity, assuming the best team will win, assuming no one is putting their hand on the scale to help influence the outcome. So if that would ever be the case, you clearly would have civil liability. That's one end of the extreme. There's another end of the extreme. And this Gannon thing is closer to the other end of the extreme, because the argument would be a very aggressive and creative and hard to get some people to accept notion that by breaking an NFL rule that was easy to break because the NFL rarely, if ever, enforces that rule. So it's just on paper, but nobody pays attention to it. The Cardinals break it. The NFL is culpable for not enforcing its own rules, but the Cardinals created a distraction that necessarily made it harder for the Eagles to win and undermined the integrity of the game, undermined the integrity of the wagers placed on the game. Again, that's an aggressive argument, but I kind of see the merit in it. And this is why it's so important that the NFL be completely buttoned up on everything it does related to gambling. Integrity of the game, integrity of the game, integrity of the wagers on the game. If that integrity is undermined through the deliberate actions of people connected to the NFL, there is potential civil liability. And isn't it fair? If I go and bet on any team in any game, I should be allowed to assume that whatever the outcome of that bet may be is determined only by the efforts of the players, the decisions of the coaches, the other factors that influence how a football game is resolved, the random bounce of the ball, the gust of wind, the bad call that accidentally happens. Not some other factor that I don't know about that was hidden from me, that if I had known about it, maybe I wouldn't have made that bet. If I had known the NFL wanted the Eagles to win the game, I wouldn't have bet on the Chiefs. If I had known that Jonathan Gannon was hopelessly distracted from his job of preparing the Eagles defense and spent X number of hours instead of watching film, getting ready for his Cardinals job interview the day after the Super Bowl, maybe I wouldn't have bet on the Eagles. You know, people like to complain about lawyers all the time because lawyers force people to be accountable for the things that they do and then force others to adjust their behavior to the standards society accepts. There's a lot of people out there that don't want to be held to that accountability. There's a lot of people that resent having other people tell them what to do. And this is the price the NFL is eventually going to have to pay for all those millions the NFL is squirreling away. And wouldn't it be easier for the NFL if it took the hard line I've been suggesting as the best way to navigate the gambling policy? Have a rule in place that we're doing no business with sports books. We're doing no business of any kind as it relates to owners investing in companies that have sports books. We're going to continue to maintain the firewall that we always had, even if the federal government is going to allow any state and every state to come up with its own legalized wagering program. Without that, you've got the NFL making a ton of money, and the flip side of that coin is the NFL acquires obligations. Clearly the obligation not to deliberately rig the outcome of a Super Bowl. We know that. The question becomes, as you get farther from that, where is the line of civil liability? What if there's a Tim Donaghy type scandal where there's a referee that has gone rogue, but the NFL wasn't properly managing, wasn't properly supervising, didn't properly hire? Negligence at various levels of bringing this official in and keeping this official around long enough for this official to wreak havoc. The NFL would potentially have liability there to be worked out in the courts. So it's funny. I feel like I'm the only one worried about this. And here's why I'm worried about it. It affects my business. If there's something that undermines the widespread faith and integrity in the product itself, if we ever get to the point where a significant number of people believe that the NFL is rigged, people are going to turn away from it. They will. They will. A certain number will turn away from it because they've always sold it as pristine. You know, I mean, when we found out that wrestling was scripted, were we surprised? It's kind of like finding out cigarettes are bad for you. I mean, was anybody really surprised? The NFL has always stood for the proposition that whatever happens on the field is only the product of the efforts of the players, the decisions of the coaches, and other variables that are inherent to the game. So that's why I'm concerned about it. I don't want the whole house to come tumbling down because the NFL, given its effort to pocket millions and millions and millions in sportsbook sponsorships, can't be counted on to have the proper moral authority to enforce rules, to craft rules, and to be creative when thinking about rules aimed at preserving the integrity of the game. Wouldn't it be easier for the NFL to come up with ways to keep the boogeyman out if the NFL isn't already getting paid by the boogeyman? That's as simple as it gets. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm Don Quixote on this. I hope I'm tilting at windmills and will continue to do so for as long as I'm alive. I hope it never happens. But I feel like the NFL isn't nearly as concerned as it needs to be about what could happen. And maybe it's going to take something like a lawsuit against the Cardinals in the NFL. We've seen crazier lawsuits get filed in sports. Maybe that's what it'll take. We're well within the statute of limitations if somebody out there wants to do it. And part of me, look, I'm not rooting for the NFL to encounter potential expense and lose in court. I mean, if they did something for which they're accountable, then so be it. But I would like to find out what really happened. And one thing I know about this, man, what are we doing over there, doggy? One thing I really would like to learn about this Jonathan Gannon situation is what really happened. Because the moment that they decided to just kind of slip the outcome through our collective 5-hole, just as the draft was getting ready to start, that's the moment that I said, man, they're up to something here. They're trying to hide something from us. They don't want us to know what really happened. And the one way to find out, one of the ways to find out, short of a congressional investigation, which won't happen, civil litigation, which could happen.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.